Welcome to the ADF Insider Essentials series. This series demonstrates the essential skills, tips, tricks, and techniques that you will require for building ADF applications. In today's demonstration, you will see how to create an ADF Business Component view object that is based on more than one entity object. One entity object for the user to update their relating data, and the second entity object to look up reference data. View objects based on more than one entity object can essentially look up additional attributes to show the user. In order to do this, we still use the Create View Object wizard, where obviously we base it on more than one entity object, where the first entity object is the primary or updatable entity object, and this second entity object is the reference or lookup entity object, where we'll display additional lookup values from. For Oracle Forms programmers, this is very similar to the post-query trigger logic, except we're not going to write any code. The declarative ADF framework will do all this work for us. At the conclusion of this presentation, we'll also look at how to set up a JSF page using this special view object and looking at a few little things we need to tweak to make this work on the web page. The prerequisites for setting up a view object based on more than one entity object is obviously you need multiple entity objects to base the view object on. In addition, however, you need an entity object association between the entity objects. This is critical for what we're going to set up today. So here is our JDeveloper IDE. As you can see in the application navigator, I have an application set up called Demo View 1, View Object 1, and two projects, Model and View Controller. And we're now going to create our view object in the model project. In expanding the model project, you'll notice we already have a number of business components created. We have our two entity objects, employees and departments, and a number of associations. And today we're going to make use of the Dept association. In order to create the view object, very similar to what you've done previously. We just right-click on the model package, click New View Object, and up pops the Create View Object wizard. We'll call our view object Employees Department View, and we're going to base its data source on an entity object. Next. In the second node of the Create View Object wizard, we define our primary entity object for this view object. This is something you'd be familiar with. So I simply select Employees and bring him to the right. You'll notice when I do that, one of the default options is that he is the updatable entity object for this view object. Now we're going to bring Department's view object across, similar to what we did with Employees, and watch what happens when we do this. When we bring the Department's entity object across, you'll notice that it picks out all the different associations that are effectively available between the two entity objects. And in this particular case, we're going to pick the Dept association. We do have some other choices. We can define the type of join between the two entity objects. In this case, I'm going to stick with an inner join. Finally, you'll notice that the checkbox reference is ticked, meaning this is the lookup entity object. This is the guy we're going to use to look up additional data to effectively show in the employee's record. In the next page of the wizard, we then pick the attributes from both entity objects that we want to include. So from the employee's entity object, I'll include the employee's ID, the first name, and last name. In conjunction, we want to show the department ID, but the department ID isn't very meaningful to the user. What we also want to do is, down here in the department's entity object, pick the department name attribute as well to show to the user, such that it's something more meaningful for the user to read. Now watch what happens when I select that attribute and take it to the right-hand side. You'll notice when I took it across, not only did it took the department name for the department's entity object, but it's also now created an additional attribute called department's ID 1, which was also taken from the department's entity object. We really do have two duplicate department IDs now, but they do come from different entity objects. To be clear, for a view object to be based on two or more entity objects, you need the department IDs in this case from both. If you remove both of them, this mechanism will not work. Now this doesn't make sense when we create a web page because the user doesn't want to see two department IDs. So all you need to do from the web page's point of view is just hide one of those IDs. In terms of the attributes of the view object and their essential properties, there's nothing we need to do. When we go to the query node of the Create View Object wizard, we do see the query, which is quite interesting because we can now see it selecting the employees fields, the departments fields, and actually the join syntax that's occurring between the two tables that are underlying the entity objects. Where did this come from? Again, basically because we have these associations set up behind the scenes that effectively model these foreign key relationships for us. From there, the only other thing I'm going to do is add an application module for that view object to be automatically created in. From here, what I'd like to do is demonstrate this working, so I'll right-click on the application module, run. This will open the Business Components browser. We'll then open the relating view object. And we can see for the very first record, employee ID 100, that the department ID 90, which is coming from the employee's EO, that's also being looked up in the department's EO. We can see department ID 1 is 90 and the department name is executive. As we step through the records, the view object based on more than one entity object takes care of this coordination for us. One of the advantages of this as well is if we come in here and change the department ID from 100 to 60, watch what happens underneath. The data is automatically updated for us. Now that we've demonstrated how to create the business components in the model project for the view object based on more than one entity object, let's have a look at the JSF side. What we're going to do is demonstrate creating a JSF page where from the data control palette we're going to drag in our new view object as an ADF editable form. Now, it's not as clear cut as the business components browser because we need to do a couple of extra things. On the primary department ID field from the employees, we need to set auto submit equals true. And in addition, for the two lookup fields, we need to set their partial triggers to the ID of the primary department ID such that they listen to any changes to that field and then automatically update themselves on the screen. Again, returning to the JDeveloper IDE, now we'll look in the View Controller project where I've already created a page called editemployees.jsf. From the data control palette, you can see the application module exposed as a data control and our view object that we created earlier. I'm going to drag that into the page as an ADF form, or what I like to call an ADF editable form. We're going to include all the columns, including the lookup data and some navigation controls. In the resulting page, you can now see that we've got all the additional fields. From here, we right-click on the page, click Run. This deploys our application to the running integrated WebLogic server. Up pops Chrome browser. And in the relating page, you can now see employee ID 100 and department ID 90 and the lookup data. And like we saw in the business components browser, as we step through the records here, it does update the relating data when the department ID changes. However, if we come through and change the department ID manually and tab out of that field, we see that the department name and department ID does not update. So how do we go about fixing that? Returning to the original page, we just simply pick the original department ID that comes from the employees entity object. We go to the property inspector and under the behaviors, we set the auto submit value for this particular field to true. In addition, we note the ID of this component, which is IT4, and we then move to the department ID and department ID 1 fields, select both of them, and in the property inspector, under the partial triggers, we want to set that to the ID that we just saw, IT4. Once we've made those changes, we can simply go back and rerun the page. Again, it opens in my browser. And now where we can see employee ID 100, we can change the department ID from 90 to 100, and you'll see that it automatically updates the data for us. Okay, so very little work in order to make the JSF page show what we need it to. So at conclusion of this demonstration, what we've seen is how easy it is to create view objects based on more than one entity object, where you can use the second entity object to look up additional attributes in order to show more meaningful data to the user. The prerequisite for this is obviously more than one entity object to be created in your model project, but in addition the entity object associations between the entity objects. In terms of the JSF page that we demonstrated, effectively the whole mechanism still works, but you need to just do a couple more things. You need to set auto submit equals true on the primary ID field, and you need to set the partial trigger IDs listening back to that original field when it changes. That concludes the demonstration from the ADF Insider Essentials series. Hopefully you've enjoyed it, and you can find more ADF Insider Essential demonstrations from oracle.com/technology/JDev. In addition there, you can find downloadable demos, tutorials, discussion forums, samples, ADF developer guides, and much more. Thanks for your time today, and I hope you can join me for another ADF Insider Essentials demonstration soon.